please.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. So we're going to have a look at UI components and how to get them done in 4 simple steps. But wait a minute, there's an asterisk there. So let's see what that is about. Well, actually, it's very often more than 4 steps, and sometimes it's more of a hobble than an actual step, but there are better and worse ways to make progress. And I think what I want to talk to you about today is actually going in a very good direction with continuing. There's a little asterisk to the 4 steps. And what I brought here for you is a navigation in 3 different shapes. Here we have a learning module, and in the learning module you can navigate from one page to another. And here we have a test and assessment test, where you can navigate from one question for another. To another, and then we have a survey where you also can go from survey question to survey question. As you can see, very similar use cases, very similar functions, but there are some details that are different between them, namely where actions are placed. Sometimes there are actions that are more global, sometimes there are actions that are for a single item that is currently being displayed. So, quite interesting what's happening there. And this is something that was noticed because we have this ongoing spring cleaning that we also heard about before, which is the Removing LUI project, Removing Legacy UI. And those screens were all built with legacy UI. So sooner or later, hopefully sooner, they have to be replaced by modern UI components, which we don't have in this shape. So we have to go all over all of these screens, and that is an excellent opportunity to question if the concepts that we had there so far are actually working, which is actually a connection to the previous presentation that we heard about user testing. That's something that you can find out during user testing if there's any user confusion, if there are misunderstandings that we might want to change. And since we have to build new UI components anyway, we should build them a bit improved and more future-proof. So, yeah. My name is Ferdinand Engländer. I work for Concepts and Training as a front-end developer, and I ascended to become an ILIAS authority to sign off on concepts and code changes for the CSS part of ILIAS. And in this presentation, we're gonna have a look at how we get a UI component done, the journey to have a new UI component in ILIAS, and how you can join as well. Yeah, the cool thing is, in an open source project, anyone can contribute. And this presentation shall also be a little bit of a motivation to look into this process. If you have any screens that are currently legacy that you may be not as happy with, there are many opportunities to shape ILIAS and to bring in new UI components. All right, so let's have a look at somewhat of an ideal path to create a UI component. This is rarely the path that actually happens, but it would be a good path to strive for. So in the beginning, we have a need, which starts the whole thing. Then, continuing from this need, we shape a concept, we gather what the requirements are. A very important step is to also look at what's out of scope of this project, and a little bit of an additional challenge, which is kind of included in all the points that we had before, but since I'm a front-end developer, I just wanted to mention it again, that visual design can be used to strengthen the functionality. So, here are a couple targets that we can strive to aim for during the entire process. We should have a process where we are considering many perspectives. These are things that we basically had to learn the hard way, so I just want to mention them to you. Some of them might be obvious, but yeah, considering many perspectives, always very helpful, because ILIAS is used by a lot of different institutions, and even just at CAT, our clients are more like in the insurance and automotive industry, and some of their needs are different from a university, for example. So yeah, our community is large, and it can help, especially if you design something like UI components that everybody's going to use, if you consider all these different use cases. This can help you to catch pitfalls earlier, what could go wrong. We don't want to create something and then a large part of the ILIAS community says that that's not what we wanted, that's not working for us. It's always good to join forces if there could be collaborations. Oftentimes, something that bothers a single service provider or a single client sometimes also bothers a lot of other people who want to change it. So lots of opportunities there. And defining a clear scope can help to keep working with purpose. This is kind of the 4 points that we landed on to drive everything that we do with regards to UI components. So let's start with the need. And here, originally I studied film, and I like this term in filmmaking and storytelling, where you have the need and the want of the main character. And it's important in storytelling, but I think this translates to real life as well, that the want is very often what the character knows what they want to achieve consciously. They say like, hey, I want this, I want that. But then in the end, in most Hollywood movies, they realize, hey, what I thought I wanted wasn't actually what I actually need. And the need is that thing that the user actually needs rather than that what they think they want. Sometimes that can be very different. Sometimes a UI component can start with, hey, we want this. Our clients told us they want this, they want it like that. But very often it's good to take a step back and think about, like, what do they actually need? What do they actually want to achieve? And maybe that what they say they want is not what they actually need. So here we had a feature request that was brought to the UI clinic. That's how I came to this project. And it was brought in by Leifos, by Alexandra Töth, which is one of these removing Louis projects. So this survey is supposed to move to the modern UI components, and the problem was there were no fitting UI components. So very straightforward way of how this became an issue. There are also several other connections to other removing Louis projects. So the toolbar buttons at the moment are a little bit deprecated because the toolbar has been sometimes abused a little bit and just stuffed with buttons that are all a little bit different and that leads to some semantic problems there. So there are already projects looking very carefully at what actually goes in that toolbar and what shouldn't go in that toolbar. And for the navigation, we have a toolbar. We have some kind of bar that goes over the entire screen, and the question is, should it stay like that? And the test and assessment, this is a big ongoing project to change all the UI components there. There are some that already have modern UI components, like the result view in manual scoring, I think is still work in progress. And the question pool data table is already out. Then, as mentioned, there was this UI clinic, and there were actually multiple appointments where we talked about this. And you can see that just from the list of names of people who went to that meeting, you have people from all kinds of different organizations. Some from universities, some in a role, in a community role of sorts, and some technical, very technical savvy people. So we had a very well-rounded group to discuss these requirements. And at the end of the UI clinic, there's somewhat like we always try to give some actionable next steps. You know, it shouldn't be that somebody leaves the UI clinic and doesn't know, like, okay, what can I do now? What should happen next? So we try to keep this always very actionable and have something that points into the future. And just to show you, also to encourage people that you don't need to be a fantastic designer or a very skilled programmer. Here we have Yvonne Seiler's notes that she kindly gave me. And she's a fantastic designer, of course, very skilled designer, but you see that at the beginning stages, at the concept stages, this can look very wild and very unrefined, and it's just about generating ideas and thinking about what you can do. And I believe in UI design, you could call this a low-fidelity mock-up. And really, anyone could join in these processes and think what positions do make the most sense, what different semantic structures do we have in an UI component. I will talk more about this a little bit later. This goes into the next step where we start to actually create the concept that can then be followed for the implementation. And I'm going to show you how this looked in the case of this UI component. Doesn't mean that it always has to go like this. There are many different ways to make a concept, of course. But I'm just going to show you the case of this UI component. Sequence navigation. So you might have already seen the kitchen sink area in ILIAS, which is an area where you can see all the UI components. And every single UI component has a description of what you are supposed to do with this UI component, how you're supposed to use it, how you're not supposed to use it. And this is a very helpful structure to think about when you write the concept for a UI component. So there's a description, and in the description you have to state the purpose. Composition is what different parts are in this kitchen sink element, like are there other buttons, other UI components, and roughly where they are and how they are connected. You have the effect, what is all the things that can happen if somebody interacts with the UI component. Rivals is similar UI components where you might want to make clear, hey, if you have this use case, this other UI component is probably what you should rather use. Or also strengthening the use case of the current UI component, saying stuff like, this is the ideal component if you want to do this or that. Then there are some rules. The usage, how you're supposed to use it and not to use it. And interaction, how you're supposed to set up the interaction. Those are written specifically for the consumers. So developers who build their screens with those UI components to use the UI components to the best effect, to the greatest effect. And going along this structure, Yvonne started a document where a first draft was formulated for each of these sections. You can see that the purpose section is being filled out, the composition and effect section. And then there was another meeting where we talked about it and refined it and tried to really get it as tight as possible. So this is also what you need if you want to concretely contribute an UI component for the code. You need to, at the minimum, provide an interface and present it in the GeoFix. And I'm going to show you real quick the interface here. And in this case, so there's very little actual PHP code. There's just this function setup for the sequence. But the part before that is the interesting one. As you can see, this is what is being displayed in the kitchen sink. And this is the text that was ultimately decided on, and that is guiding the implementation of this UI component. And if you would take your time and you would look at the different versions of it, you can see that from the draft it was more, and then it got cut down and refined and focused in order to keep it realistic and doable and a good scope, which is the next point that we're going to talk about. Just as important to define what a UI component is, we realized a couple of times that it can be actually more important to define what it is not. First of all, to avoid misunderstandings. Like, you know, maybe there are people that hope like, oh, this UI component is going to solve all my problems. It's a sequence something, so I can put it in everything that is vaguely reminding me of a sequence. And the other part, of course, is that we can keep the scope of the workload to a manageable workload. And this is also the part, this is, of course, happening throughout the entire process. The more people you have involved, the more opinions and expectations and wishes you have from all kinds of sides that could potentially and will clash. And one way how we were very well able to deal with that, especially in this project, was by separating use cases. Because, you know, very often it's not that another person's idea is completely invalid. It's just that it doesn't fit into this exact use case. It doesn't fit into this exact UI component. So I think what worked very well in this case, and I only realized that in retrospect as I was preparing this talk, was that we were very that we managed to separate use cases, that we managed to define what does this UI component do and what does it not do. And I think this is very good because it can be guided by the principle, hey, we should make a decision to do one thing well rather than many things badly. And of course, if you answer one of these questions, it often leads to 10 more questions. If you say like, okay, what about, what's, like one example. So we have a sequence, and the sequence shows you a form. What happens if you press next? The button says, next, show me the next item. But the problem was that arises very early is the form saved or not? And yeah, that was one of the big discussions. And yeah, the question, does clicking next save forms of the currently displayed element? If it doesn't, can there be an extra save element action? So you would have a button that says save input, and then you have a button that says next. Is that good? Is that bad? Is that going to confuse people? So for the thing that is now actually implemented, for the thing that actually got created, we decided to make the step that this is a navigation and not an input group. And as such, it's meant to only navigate from one point to the next, which unfortunately does disqualify it a little bit for the test and assessment and the survey. I say unfortunately. It's actually a good thing to realize like, hey, we need something else here. Because, for example, the question, how should the test save? Should there be a draft state? Should everything be automatically saved? That's way out of scope for a UI component. That's something that needs its own context, concept. So yeah, we decided to focus on a sequence navigator that feeds a progressing linear sequence segment by segment. Back and next do not carry out any additional actions. However, for actions, the consumer can add buttons. There are two button types. One targets the outer context, one targets all settings. So you can do something like stop the entire test, for example, or stop the entire sequence. And then there's another button to do something with the segment that is currently being shown. In this case, out of scope, I think I would put it in more positive words, that it also shows an outlook of what else we could do. So, of course, only because we decided in this UI component to not do it, doesn't mean that there won't be a test or survey player UI component or a form wizard that can save draft states, that can show a form section by section by section. But it would require different decisions, different concepts, partly also concepts that go far beyond just an UI component. If you have like an autosave for the test and assessment, that's not even a UI question. That's just, you know, how is data processing being done? How is, like, what is the user experience? How do we handle it on the technology side and stuff like that? So yeah, it kind of opens a window a little bit in these worlds, but to actually do it, we would have clearly defined needs, concepts, and funding to get that done. And as the last point, I want to talk a little bit about design. So design. I put it as a little bit of an extra point at the end, but of course it shouldn't be an extra point at the end. Ideally, it's something that you think about before as you make the concept for your UI component. And the reason is not because design makes something pretty. Ideally, it also does that. But the main target, the main goal is information architecture. And information architecture means what do you see first, second, and third. And with design, you can control this. You can make things bigger. You can make things in a very notable color and stuff like that. So instead of showing a user a thing where you see everything at once, a wall of text, you show them what they're supposed to see first, supposed to see second, supposed to see third. And the tools that you have are the tools of design, color, shape, size. And what it can also provide is groupings. You often have it that a user wants to do a certain kind of thing, and if your user is in this state of mind, they don't want to do another thing. So for example, if your user is doing a test, is writing an exam, they do want to see the next button and not the stop exam button, because right now for them the most important thing is to do the entire exam. And by making clear groupings, by saying, okay, here's the navigation, and here's the global stuff with the test where you can stop your test and do whatever with it, you make it easier for people to, if they are in this mindset, they look over there. If they are in this mental model is what it's called, they look in another direction. This is how it looked after a bare bones implementation by my colleague Niels. And personally, I like this stage quite a lot because I get something that's already functional, but I'm still able to like puzzle things around and put them somewhere different. And in this case, people were a little bit confused by the listing here in the middle. They were like, why does this sequence navigator show a list? Because the sequence navigator can show whatever in its body. But yeah, so we had to move forward with that, and everything that I mentioned with, you know, the segments and the semantic grouping and stuff like that still had to be done. So for the semantic groups, we looked at, okay, what are the groups that we have here? We have do something with the global context, with all segments in a sequence. Do something with the current segment. We have existing mental models like button hierarchy. Everybody who uses ILIAS knows the button default and knows the button primary. So the button primary does something big that you often want to do. The button default is for less frequent actions that are in the priority one step behind that. We also have view controls that look a certain way. We have something that people already know, which is the pagination, which is a little bit like a sequence, but that you can jump between two different pages immediately. So this is something where I thought, like, maybe I should use that, what the users are already familiar with. They know how to jump around with a pagination. So maybe that should be the look for my navigation. Then looking at references, always very helpful, because there are a lot of smarter people than me who already thought about this, and big companies who already thought how to solve this effectively. And here just one image to represent that. So we looked at a bunch of players and sequences and other websites. And one concept that you see a lot, that you have these bars that have different purposes that you look at if you are in a certain state of mind, in a certain mental model. Yvonne did these nice low fidelity mock-ups where you can see that some parts are like, there's like the word global actions, where it's already thinking about these semantic groupings. And yeah, this is what I ended up with for now. One big thing that I added are these sticky bars, because very often if you do like a test, or you look through a sequence of images or something like that, you always want to see how to get to the next segment. That's why we decided to make this navigation sticky. Then we have clearly the global actions at the top, and we have the actions of the segment in the header for the segment. And yeah, this is what we landed on for now. Of course, this is then also this is basically an assumption, and then we need to see how people use it. We need to see it in action in the first implementations. But I think most people in the project, involved in the project, were already very happy with the shape that this took. So yeah, still on my to-do list, by the way, just to mention that. I already did the research for the accessibility stuff. We're going to define clear regions for the part of the page that updates. And there's this ARIA controls parameter where you can clearly set for the navigation buttons that they control what's within that region. So for screen reader, it should be absolutely clear where the next button takes effect. So, conclusion. In this case, we had a relatively clear discussion to concept to implementation workflow. And for this one, it worked very well. There's currently the PR for this UI component. I think what also worked very well in this project is that we really picked a clear scope in the end. I feel like that could have gone terribly wrong with this one if we would have tried to build a UI component that can immediately be the test player, immediately be the survey player. Because if we would have done that, we would certainly not be done with this now. And for a lot of use cases, it's immediately very usable. Yeah, we have a working UI component that's great for the specific scope, but can also go slightly beyond. With the action buttons, I think there are quite some complex things that you could potentially do with this. Consumers need to be a little bit careful, I think, that they don't abuse the UI component, what it is and what it is not. But yeah, you can add actions to the segments. And the concepts that didn't make it in, we already have them. They are a head start for future components. Or maybe there's a child component. Maybe there's a derivative of the sequence navigator that builds on top of it, has more bars, has more options. And last but not least, I just want to stress once again, this is something that, of course, anyone can participate. The UI clinic is open and public. You can see in advance what topics are being discussed there. You can register your own topics. It helps a lot if you already have a concept, if you already made user testing, if you already made some kind of concept work that we can actually talk about and build on. And good UI components is a great thing for everybody because it helps all future ILIAS projects. Yeah, and that's it for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ferdinand. I think we have for one question. Okay, wait a second. Over
there. Thank you very much for your very entertaining presentation. I have one quite specific question concerning UI components. I got reminded of that because you showed your UI component with a sticky top line or sticky bottom line. How do you handle inside UI components something that goes kinda out of the scope of the UI component? For example, when you have an UI component with a sticky headline, you might have a UI component above this with also a sticky headline, which contradicts in the usage of both UI components, which should be independent in my opinion. So how can I address this in the interface or in the UI link? They say this is something that goes out of the scope of the UI component, but it's still good because of reasons or something like that.
Yeah, that is indeed something to be careful about. The data table had a little bit of the same problem because the header of the data table is also sticky. So short answer is, thankfully, it is kind of local because it's only within the container of the UI component. The actual problem arises if another sticky element covers it up. Then you have the problem that two sticky elements stack because they both, for example, the breadcrumbs, they could cover this up potentially. Yeah, those are edge cases that hopefully show up during testing, and they indeed need to be addressed. You need to check if there is a breadcrumb already on the page, and then you might have to add that to push everything else down.
Okay, one short question.
Yes, one quick question. I have a little bit of concern because this thing is called Sequence Navigator, and you talked about focuses. What was the mental model of the thing right now?
Yeah.
And I have to. My feeling looking at it is that the navigation in the sequence has very little focus. It is kind of very laid back. Because the first thing I see is the big blocks on the top. This is the two buttons. And the navigation is kind of a little bit shy in the whole thing. But that was just my first reaction looking at it.
Yeah, very valid point. I think we actually might have been misled a little bit by the, like, hey, the action is the most important thing. Yeah, that would be something that we could have another look at, definitely. All right.
Thank you. Yeah, you have to go on to follow the problem. Thank you, Ferdinand.
Thank you all.